The soldier returned home to find his daughter hidden away in the dark, and a life he no longer recognized living within his own walls. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of steam and steel that severed the last link to the world he had known for 2 brutal years. Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne stepped down onto the wet asphalt of the station parking lot, the motion fluid and practiced. The air that filled his lungs was thick with the scent of rain and damp earth, a rich, living smell so profoundly different from the sterile, sun-baked dust of Kandahar that it made him dizzy for a moment. He shifted the weight of the duffel bag on his shoulder. It was heavy, but not with the familiar burden of armor plates, ammunition, and radios. This weight was different. It was the mass of 2 years of unspoken words, of letters read until the creases gave way, of a singular, burning hope that had served as his armor against the chaos. The bag felt heavier than his full combat load ever had. He had told no one he was coming. Not his wife, Sarah, not his daughter, Lily. The transport had landed at the base 3 days ago, and the army, in a rare moment of grace, had cut his out-processing short. He was a week early. The surprise was a jewel he had polished in his mind during the long, humming flight over the ocean. He imagined their faces, the gasp of shock melting into tears of joy. It was the scene that had played on a loop in his head through firefights and lonely nights. The walk was the final decompression. He bypassed the lone taxi, its engine idling expectantly. He wanted to feel the ground under his boots, to reacquaint himself with the geography of his own life. Oak Creek, Ohio. It was so quiet. The silence here was a presence, a gentle blanket, not the tense, listening void that preceded violence. He turned onto Maple Avenue. The houses were the same, a familiar lineup of siding and brick, their windows dark and placid in the late afternoon gloom. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses were still there, drooping under the weight of the recent rain. The old Miller house still needed a new coat of paint. These were the constants, the anchors he had clung to. Proof that while he was gone, the world he belonged to had waited patiently for his return. Everything was a landmark of memory. The crack in the sidewalk where Lily had fallen off her bike when she was 4. The massive oak tree on the corner whose branches they had declared a castle. Each step was a return, not just to a place, but to a version of himself he had carefully preserved. The man who was a husband and a father, not a sergeant. He rounded the final corner, and his heart hammered against his ribs in a familiar, frantic rhythm. There it was. His house. The small, blue Craftsman with the white trim and the wide front porch. Home. But something was wrong. His practiced eyes, trained to spot the incongruous detail in a landscape, the tripwire in the dust, scanned the scene and registered the anomalies instantly. The flowerbeds Sarah had tended with such devotion were choked with weeds, their vibrant colors lost in a tangle of crabgrass and neglect. A dark blue sedan, a model he had never seen before, was parked in his driveway, occupying the space where his beat-up Ford truck should have been. A coldness, sharp and unwelcome, pricked the back of his neck. It was the feeling of walking into a room that was supposed to be empty and sensing another presence. His stride slowed. The joyful anticipation curdled into a tight knot of apprehension in his gut. He reached the porch steps, his boots making hollow sounds on the wood. He pulled the old brass key from his pocket, the one he had carried through deserts and mountains. He slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, jiggling it, but it met a hard, unyielding stop. The lock was new. The air stilled. The friendly quiet of the neighborhood now seemed menacing. He was locked out of his own life. For a moment, he just stood there, the useless key in his hand, his mind refusing to process the information. His training kicked in, overriding the emotional paralysis. Assess the situation. Find an alternate entry. He knelt, his knee protesting the cold dampness of the porch, and felt under the loose flagstone near the steps. His fingers brushed against the familiar cold metal of the spare key. A small measure of relief washed over him. Some things had not changed. He slid this key into the new lock. It turned with a clean, crisp click. Elias pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent. Not the peaceful silence of an empty home, but a dead, still silence. A film of dust coated the surface of the entryway table. He ran a finger over it, leaving a clean streak. On the mantel above the fireplace, their family photo, him, Sarah, and a grinning 5-year-old Lily on his shoulders, was grayed over with a fine layer of neglect. Unwashed glasses sat on the coffee table. The air was stale, holding the ghost of a scent he didn't recognize, some kind of floral air freshener. This wasn't his home. It was the museum of a life that used to be his. Then he heard it. A floorboard creaked upstairs. A heavy tread, not Sarah's light step. A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, drifted down the stairs. "Honey, is that you? Did you forget something?" Elias froze. The blood drained from his face, a sudden, shocking cold that left his skin clammy. His duffel bag slid from his shoulder and hit the floor with a soft, heavy thud. The world tilted, the walls of his own hallway seeming to press in on him. He was a trespasser. A ghost. And then, a different sound. A tiny, muffled whimper. It came from the coat closet under the staircase. The shock evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. His combat instincts, dormant for 3 days, roared back to life. He was no longer a husband. He was an operator. Threat upstairs. Unknown in the closet. His heart hammered a steady, powerful beat against his ribs. He moved without thinking, his boot silent on the hardwood floor. He reached the closet door. His eyes caught the glint of metal. A simple slide bolt, installed on the outside. It was drawn shut. Locked from the outside. His breath caught in his throat. A raw, protective fury he hadn't felt since the loss of one of his own men surged through him. He reached out, his hand steady, and drew the bolt back. The sound was deafening in the silence. He pulled the door open. In the cramped darkness, illuminated only by the grey light from the hall, a small figure was curled into a tight ball. His daughter. Lily. She was 7 now, her face thinner, her eyes huge and dark in the gloom. She looked up at him, her body trembling violently. A flicker of recognition sparked in her terrified gaze, followed by a wave of confusion. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry out in joy. She just stared, her small chest heaving with shallow breaths. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thread of sound. "You're too late." The man appeared at the top of the stairs. He was tall, dressed in jeans and a grey sweater, his face a mask of casual confusion. "Sarah," he called again. Then he saw Elias standing in the hall, a uniformed ghost staring at the open closet door. The man's confusion morphed into alarm. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his hand gripping the banister. Before Elias could form a word, before he could unleash the storm of rage and pain coiling in his chest, the front door opened again. It was Sarah. She held a bag of groceries, a small smile on her face that vanished the instant she saw him. The bag slipped from her grasp. Oranges and a carton of milk tumbled across the floor in slow motion. Her face, a constellation of emotions he couldn't begin to decipher, crumpled. Shock. Disbelief. And something that looked terrifyingly like guilt. "Elias," she breathed, his name a ghost on her lips. He couldn't speak. He could only look from his wife's shattered expression, to the strange man in his house, and down to his terrified daughter who was still huddled in the closet. The perfect homecoming scene in his mind shattered into a million razor-sharp pieces. Without a word, he bent down, scooped Lily into his arms, she felt so light, so fragile, and walked out the front door, leaving the spilled groceries and the wreckage of his life behind him. He checked them into the first cheap motel he could find on the edge of town. A place with peeling paint and the lingering smell of disinfectant. Lily hadn't said another word. She just clung to him, her small body periodically racked with silent shudders. He needed answers, but he knew he couldn't get them from Sarah. Not now. The truth would be tangled in her tears and excuses. He needed facts. He needed context. The next morning, leaving a sleeping Lily in the care of the kindly old woman who managed the motel, he walked back to his old neighborhood. He didn't go to his house. He went next door, to the small, tidy bungalow of Mr. Abernathy. The old man had lived on that street for 50 years, a quiet, watchful presence. Abernathy opened the door, his aged face lighting up with disbelief, then profound sadness. He ushered Elias inside, to a living room that smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. "Elias, my boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you were gone." "We all did." And then, the story came out. It was a simple, brutal narrative. 6 months into his deployment, Elias's unit had been ambushed. A devastating IED strike. The initial reports were chaotic. For weeks, he was listed as missing in action. Then, the designation changed. The 2 men in dress uniforms had come to Sarah's door. They had presented her with a folded flag. They had held a memorial service for him at the town hall. The whole town had mourned Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne. "Sarah." "She broke, son," Abernathy said, his gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance. "Just shattered into pieces. For the better part of a year, she was like a ghost. Barely left the house. Then she started going to a support group. Met that fellow, Mark. He's a decent man, Elias. Lost his own wife a few years back. He was patient. He helped her. He brought her back to the living. They had gotten engaged a month ago. They were trying to build a new life on the ashes of the old one." Elias listened, the anger inside him slowly being hollowed out and replaced with a vast, empty ache. He hadn't been betrayed. He had been mourned. His wife had grieved him, buried an empty casket, and, after an impossible time, had tried to move on. He was the ghost at the feast, a spectre from a life everyone else had already laid to rest. "But Lily," Elias said, his voice raw. "The closet, Mr. Abernathy." "She was locked in the closet." The old man's face clouded with concern. "I don't know anything about that, son. I've seen the little one playing in the yard. She's gotten quiet. Very quiet. But locked in a closet? That's not right." Back in the sterile chill of the motel room, the truth settled on him like a shroud. He looked at his daughter, who was sitting on the bed, meticulously coloring in a drawing book. He had been a name on a wall, a photograph on a mantel. And in his absence, something had happened to his little girl. He called Sarah. They met at a small, empty park halfway between the motel and the house. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, her face pale. "Why was she in the closet, Sarah?" he asked. There was no heat in his voice, only a chilling emptiness. Why was it locked from the outside? The question broke her. A fresh wave of tears streamed down her face as she finally told him the rest of the story. After his death, Lily had developed a crippling anxiety. The world had become a terrifying place. She started hiding. At first, it was under her bed. Then it escalated. She would seek out the smallest, darkest places she could find whenever she was scared or overwhelmed. Closets, cupboards, the space behind the washing machine. It was her only coping mechanism. "Mark. He doesn't understand," Sarah sobbed. "He's a good man, Elias, he is, but he doesn't get it. He thinks it's a phase, that she needs discipline. He said she needs to learn that hiding isn't the answer. The slide bolt had been his idea. A way to teach her a lesson about running away when people came to visit. He had done it once before, for just a few minutes. Yesterday, when Elias had arrived, was the second time. The world stopped. Elias stared at her, seeing not a betrayer, but a woman drowning, trying to keep her head and her daughter's head above water, and making a terrible, compromising choice in the process. The dilemma was a razor wire in his mind. He could destroy them. One call to the police about Mark's discipline would bring their fragile new world crashing down. He could fight for Sarah, for the life he was owed, and tear her away from the man who had helped her heal, potentially sending her right back into the darkness. He could declare war to reclaim his own past. Or he could change the mission. He spent the rest of the day in the motel room with Lily. He didn't ask questions. He just sat with her while she drew. After a while, she finished a picture and held it up for him to see. It was a drawing of a small house. In front of it stood a family. A mommy and a little girl holding her hand. Beside them stood a smiling stick figure, labeled Mark. And off to the side, almost at the edge of the paper, was another figure. This one was drawn in faint, grey crayon, indistinct and fading. A ghost. He looked at the ghost, then at the little girl in the drawing, and finally at the real, breathing child sitting beside him. He understood. His old life was the ghost. His duty was no longer to the past. His new mission was the little girl holding the crayon. He couldn't fix what was broken. But he could stand guard over the future. The meeting took place in a neutral, sterile coffee shop. The air smelled of burnt coffee and sugar. Elias sat across from Sarah and Mark. Mark looked ashamed, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. Sarah just looked exhausted. Elias didn't raise his voice. He spoke with the quiet, unshakable authority of a man who had led others through life and death situations. This was just another operation, with different rules of engagement. "This is not a negotiation," he began, his voice calm and level. "These are the terms. Mark, you will never be alone with my daughter again. Ever. The three of you," he looked from Mark to Sarah, "will begin family counseling immediately. With a specialist in childhood trauma. I will find my own place nearby. But I will be in Lily's life. I will see her every day if I want to. I am her father. That part of my life did not die." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between them. "I am not here to fight you, Sarah. I am not here to destroy what you've built. I am here to protect my child. That is the only mission now." Mark looked up, his eyes meeting Elias's for the first time. There was no malice in them, only shame and a dawning understanding. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're right. I'm sorry." Sarah let out a shuddering breath, a sound of profound relief and profound heartbreak all at once. She nodded, tears tracing new paths down her tired face. The immediate conflict was over. No shots were fired, no ground was taken by force. He had lost his wife and his home, but he had secured his daughter. He had accepted the terms of his new reality. For months later, the sterile box of an apartment had started to feel like a command post. Elias's command post. It was small, furnished with second-hand items and a military-issue neatness. But the walls were a testament to his new life. Dozens of photos of Lily were tacked up everywhere. Lily at the park. Lily eating ice cream. A school photo where she was almost smiling. He had a job at the local hardware store, the quiet routine of stocking shelves and mixing paint a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. He spent 3 afternoons a week and every single weekend with his daughter. They went to therapy. He went to his own sessions at the VA, finally talking about the ghosts he'd brought home in his duffel bag. Their biggest project was a small balcony garden. He was teaching her how to be brave in open spaces, one small pot at a time. On a bright Saturday morning, he was helping her push a single sunflower seed into a pot of dark, rich soil. She patted the dirt down with her small fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she looked up at him, and for the first time since his return, her smile was whole. It reached her eyes, which were bright and clear. "It's going to grow all the way to the sun, Daddy," she said with the absolute certainty of a child. Elias looked at her, at the fierce, beautiful life blooming in front of him. He looked past her, out the window of his small apartment at the quiet street below. He had gone to war to protect an idea of home, an idea that had died while he was away. But the war had taught him that a mission can change. You adapt, or you fail. He had come home, not to the life he had lost, but to the life that needed him most. And in the simple act of planting a seed with his daughter, Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne finally found his peace. His new mission had begun,